For over a century, the lands of England and France were bound by a long, unfolding story, a quiet, simmering struggle known to history as the 100 Years' War. It was a conflict that, beneath its surface of grand campaigns and noble ambitions, was subtly reshaping the very essence of how battles were fought, and indeed, how societies were structured. Tonight, we will gently journey into this era of quiet transformation. We will explore a moment when the weight of ancient tradition, embodied by the armored knight, met the swift, unassuming flight of a simple, yet revolutionary, weapon. A weapon that would, in one pivotal engagement, quietly rewrite the rules of warfare. We will dive into the story of Agincourt, a name that echoes softly through the centuries, a testament to how the quiet power of innovation could, in a single day, gently, yet decisively, alter the course of history. So, before you settle in, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, and let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what time it is for you. It's always intriguing to see who's joining us from around the world. Now, dim the lights. Perhaps light an incense or two for that soothing fragrance. And let's ease into tonight's journey together. Our journey begins not on a specific battlefield, but across the vast canvas of the 100 Years' War itself. This prolonged conflict, stretching from the early 14th century into the mid-15th, was far more than a series of isolated clashes. It was a crucible, a slow, patient process that quietly forged a new age of warfare. Historians often speak of a military revolution emerging from these years, a subtle, yet profound, shift away from the familiar rhythms of medieval combat. This transformation was not a sudden explosion but a gradual change, a deliberate erosion of older military traditions. The very nature of warfare was being reshaped by underlying forces, moving from individual acts of gallantry to a more practical, collective approach. For centuries, the battlefield had been dominated by the armored knight. These figures, resplendent in their polished steel, mounted on powerful steeds, were the very embodiment of martial prowess and chivalric ideals. Their individual gallantry and personal honor often dictated the flow of battle, and their perceived invincibility was a cornerstone of medieval military thought. Armies were often assembled through feudal obligations, where nobles brought their own retinues, leading to forces that could be, at times, a motley collection of varying training and abilities. This decentralized system, while functional for its era, presented inherent limitations in terms of cohesion and overall effectiveness for prolonged engagements. Yet, as the 100 Years' War unfolded, a quiet change began to take root, particularly within the English ranks. The reliance on these traditional feudal levies slowly diminished. For campaigns waged across the sea, beyond England's borders, kings began to pay their soldiers. This subtle shift meant that the English army became increasingly composed of professional soldiers, men who served for wages, not merely out of feudal obligation. This quiet professionalization meant a more cohesive, more disciplined force, described as an articulated organism responding to a central command, rather than a collection of bellicose individuals. This transformation was driven by the need for more reliable, disciplined forces for prolonged overseas campaigns, as feudal obligations typically only applied to service within England. The necessity of paid, standing armies gradually elevated the status of the common soldier, particularly the archer, subtly challenging the aristocratic dominance of warfare. And within this evolving landscape, a weapon of understated simplicity began its quiet ascent: the English longbow. It was a bow, often crafted from a single piece of resilient yew wood, stretching to about 6 feet in length. Its origins, some say, whispered from the valleys of Wales, where English forces under Edward I first encountered its impressive power and range. Quietly, deliberately, this formidable weapon was incorporated into the English military, and by the early 14th century, it had become central to their approach to war. This adoption was not a sudden invention, but an adaptation of existing Welsh designs, speaking to a broader theme of military evolution driven by practical necessity rather than grand design. The emphasis on its understated simplicity and devastating effectiveness, and its role as a game-changer highlights its quiet, persistent influence. The longbow was not a sudden, dramatic invention, but a patient evolution, a testament to practical necessity. Its effectiveness was not a theory. It had been quietly proven on battlefields like Sluis, Crecy, and Poitiers, where its relentless barrage had already begun to challenge the long-held dominance of the mounted knight. These earlier successes established a comforting pattern of the longbow's capabilities, gently preparing the listener for its decisive impact at Agincourt without creating undue suspense. This quiet ascendancy of the longbow had ripples beyond the battlefield, gently touching the very fabric of society. The middling farmers, small landowners, and skilled tradesmen who mastered this demanding weapon found their social and economic fortunes subtly rising. The yeoman archer, as they came to be known, quietly embodied a new social order, where ability was more prized than birth. This represents a subtle, yet profound, shift in social mobility, a quiet triumph for the common person. This gentle shifting of social strata, where skill gained prominence over inherited status, provides a low-key pathos, exploring universal human aspirations for recognition and advancement, encountering the inherent grimness of warfare by highlighting its unexpected social consequences. As the 100 Years' War continued its measured course, the stage was being set. The traditional might of French chivalry, deeply rooted in its ancient ways, would soon face an English army transformed by professional discipline and armed with a weapon whose quiet power had already begun to reshape the very landscape of medieval conflict. This gentle hum of change would soon crescendo, not into a clamor, but into a decisive, historical moment. As the echoes of the 100 Years' War continued to reverberate across the Channel, a new figure emerged to press England's long-standing claims to the French throne, King Henry V. His ambition was not merely to reclaim lost territories, but to assert a full, historic right to the crown of France itself, a claim rooted in the lineage of Edward III, whose mother, Isabella, was the daughter of the French King Philip IV. This dynastic assertion, though legally complex and often disputed by the French who adhered to Salic law, provided the quiet, underlying justification for Henry's audacious invasion in the year 1415. For Henry, the timing felt opportune. France was quietly fractured by internal civil strife, a subtle weakness that he believed could be exploited to strengthen his own authority as king and to solidify the loyalty of his subjects at home. In August of 1415, a vast English armada, carrying an army of approximately 12,000 men, set sail from Southampton, their ships a quiet testament to the immense logistical undertaking. This force, comprising around 2,300 men-at-arms and 9,000 bowmen, was a formidable sight, though its true strength lay not just in numbers, but in the disciplined training of its longbowmen, who would prove to be the very center of gravity for Henry's army. Their initial objective was the strategic port town of Harfleur, nestled at the mouth of the River Seine. Its capture was crucial. It would provide a vital base of operations, a secure port for reinforcements, and a means to quietly disrupt French trade routes. The siege of Harfleur commenced on August 18th, a methodical encirclement of the well-defended town. Harfleur's thick outer walls, studded with 26 towers, presented a formidable challenge. and the English employed their gunpowder artillery, a relatively new and significant development in siege warfare, to breach its defenses. The days that followed were marked by a quiet, debilitating struggle for both sides. The English attempts to undermine the walls were met with French countermines, and the defenders poured torrents of boiling water, quicklime, and sulfur down upon the besiegers, creating a grim, unseen struggle beneath the surface of the earth and along the ramparts. Yet, the most insidious adversary was not the French garrison, but the unseen forces of disease. An alarming number of English soldiers fell victim to malaria and dysentery, often referred to as the bloody flux, a silent, relentless foe that spread through the camp. The combination of unusually hot weather, the damp marsh air, and perhaps even contaminated food, contributed to the quiet suffering. As many as a third of Henry's army would succumb to these illnesses, their strength slowly ebbing away, diminishing the military success of the siege even as it progressed. The ships that carried the most seriously ill back to England were so fouled by the sick that many could not be used again, a quiet testament to the unseen toll of the campaign. After 36 days of relentless pressure, with their water supply contaminated and their numbers dwindling from disease and constant bombardment, Harfleur finally capitulated on September 22, 1415. It was a victory, but a costly one, leaving Henry's army considerably reduced in strength. With a garrison of 300 men-at-arms and 900 archers left to hold the newly captured port, Henry's remaining force, now numbering roughly 900 men-at-arms and 5,000 archers, was in a precarious state, tired, sick, and malnourished. The initial ambition to conquer Paris now seemed a distant dream. Faced with a diminished army and the onset of autumnal rains that made the countryside difficult to traverse, Henry's options narrowed. He could withdraw, a move he considered akin to retreat and dishonorable, or he could attempt a march to Calais, an English-held stronghold on the coast, from which his army could honorably return home. Overruling his war council, Henry chose the latter, a decision born of a quiet determination to demonstrate his ability to proceed through a hostile countryside under what he believed was divine protection. On October 6th, Henry's army, in middling condition, began its arduous 100-mile march towards Calais. They carried only enough food for an 8-day journey, hoping to cover at least 20 miles a day, a challenging pace given the expected daily rains and the need for limited foraging. The route was fraught with peril. The French, led by commanders such as the Constable Charles d'Albret and Marshal Jean-Toulon-Maingre, Boucicaut, were actively pursuing them, seeking to block their path and force a decisive battle. Henry's hope was to slip past the French army unnoticed, finding an undefended bridge or ford on the Somme River, much like Edward III had done in 1346. However, the French proved elusive and effective in their pursuit. Despite crossing 2 rivers in the first 5 days, Henry's army managed to cover only 80 miles, 20 less than intended, a quiet sign of the growing strain. The delay allowed a large French force to intercept them near the village of Agincourt on October 24th, about 45 miles south of Calais. The English army, tired, sick, and hungry, found itself in a desperate situation, its back to the wall, facing a numerically superior enemy. The quiet march had reached its end, and the stage was now set for an unavoidable confrontation, a moment where the audacity of a king would meet the formidable might of French chivalry. As the English army, diminished and weary, pressed on towards Calais, a different kind of energy was stirring across the French countryside. The news of Henry V's audacious invasion, and particularly his march through their lands, had ignited a quiet, simmering fury among the French nobility. This was not merely a foreign incursion. It was an affront to their honor, a challenge to their very identity as the preeminent martial force of Europe. The air, once filled with the distant sounds of English marching, now began to hum with the quiet anticipation of a grand assembly, a gathering of the finest chivalry France could muster, poised to crush the audacious English king. 1. The response was swift and overwhelming. From every corner of the kingdom, the flower of French chivalry began to converge. Dukes, counts, and lords, their banners unfurling in the crisp autumn air, rode forth with their retinues of heavily armored knights and men-at-arms. The clatter of hooves on ancient roads, the gentle shimmer of polished steel, and the quiet murmur of thousands of voices swelled into a formidable chorus. This was an army built on centuries of tradition, a force that embodied the very essence of medieval warfare. Each knight, encased in plate armor that was nearing the peak of its development, was considered a formidable, almost invincible, fighting machine, often likened to the M1 Abrams tank of the era for their speed, heavy armament, and sheer kinetic impact. Their confidence in this traditional approach was absolute, rooted in a deep-seated belief in their noble breeding, divine superiority, and vast wealth. The very idea that some goofy peasant with a hunting weapon could challenge their inherent martial prowess was almost unthinkable, a quiet underestimation that would prove profoundly costly. The sheer numerical superiority of the French was staggering. While Henry V's army had dwindled to perhaps 6,000 to 9,000 men after the costly siege of Harfleur and the arduous march, the French host was estimated to be anywhere from 12,000 to a colossal 36,000 strong. Some accounts suggest the French could have outnumbered the English by as much as 5 to 1, or at the very least, a decisive 2 to 1. This overwhelming advantage fostered a pervasive sense of overconfidence among the French commanders and nobility. They saw the English as a tired, sick, and hungry force, on the run and ripe for a decisive defeat. The memory of the disease that had ravaged the English camp at Harfleur lingered, reinforcing their belief in the English army's inherent weakness. This hubris, a quiet certainty in their own invincibility, was a significant factor in their approach to the impending battle, leading them to disregard the lessons of past encounters where English longbows had proven devastating. Leading this mighty host were figures of considerable renown, though their collective command structure would prove to be a subtle weakness. The Constable of France, Charles d'Albret, and Marshal Jean-Toulet Maingre, known as Boucicaut, were among the principal commanders. Beneath them, a multitude of dukes and counts, including the Dukes of Bar and d'Alençon, and the Counts of Merle and Falkenberg, commanded various divisions, each eager to claim glory and ransom from the English invaders. The desire for personal glory and the opportunity for revenge against the English, who had been traipsing around France for quite some time, created a powerful, almost irresistible urge among the knights to be at the forefront of the attack. This collective eagerness, while a testament to their bravery, subtly hinted at a potential breakdown in discipline, as individual ambition threatened to overshadow coordinated strategy. The lack of a unified, clear chain of command within the French army, in contrast to Henry V's decisive leadership, would contribute to a lack of coordination on the battlefield. The French battle plan, though not always perfectly coordinated due to this somewhat muddled chain of command, generally envisioned a traditional approach. Their army was typically divided into 3 main battles or lines: a vanguard, the main battle in the middle, and a rearward battle at the back. The primary force would be the heavy cavalry and dismounted men-at-arms, intended to overwhelm the English lines through sheer weight and impact. A small mounted contingent was also planned, tasked with driving away the English archers from the flanks, thereby exposing Henry V and his men-at-arms to the full force of the French charge. This plan, while seemingly sound in theory, was deeply rooted in the centuries-old belief that the armored knight was the ultimate arbiter of the battlefield, an assumption that would soon be tested by the quiet, relentless hum of the English longbows. They believed that their sheer numbers and the formidable presence of their armored cavalry would simply sweep away the English, regardless of any tactical innovations the enemy might employ. As the French army swelled in numbers, their camp, in stark contrast to the solemn and disciplined English, was loud and boisterous. The sounds of drinking and boisterous preparations for what they believed would be a certain glory filled the air. They were on their home turf, about to expel the poisonous English, a psychological advantage that further fueled their confidence. The quiet murmur of their conversations, the clinking of cups, and the occasional burst of laughter would have drifted across the fields, a stark auditory contrast to the hushed English lines. This atmosphere of confident revelry, while seemingly harmless, subtly masked a deeper strategic complacency, a quiet underestimation of their weary but disciplined foe. The two armies now stood poised, separated by a relatively short distance, the tension between them almost palpable. The English, though weary and outnumbered, possessed a quiet cohesion and a weapon that the French, in their unwavering adherence to tradition and their overwhelming confidence, had yet to truly comprehend. The stage was now set, not just for a battle, but for a profound reevaluation of medieval warfare, a moment where the sheer weight of chivalry would meet the quiet, disciplined power of a new kind of soldier. The inevitable clash was drawing near, and the fields of Agincourt awaited the unfolding of a new chapter in military history. As the quiet, tense hours of October 24th, 1415, slowly gave way to the dawn of St. Crispin's Day, a profound stillness settled over the narrow fields near the village of Agincourt. The air was cool and damp, carrying the subtle scent of wet earth and distant wood smoke. Heavy rains from the previous day had transformed the recently plowed ground into a treacherous expanse of deep, clinging mud, a silent, unseen adversary that would play a significant role in the unfolding drama. This particular terrain, bounded by dense woodlands on either side, created a natural funnel, subtly narrowing the space between the two armies. This geographical feature, seemingly innocuous, would prove to be a quiet advantage for the English, effectively undermining the French numerical superiority by restricting their ability to maneuver their vast forces. The woods themselves offered a quiet protection, shielding the English flanks from potential cavalry attacks, a subtle detail that would prove crucial. King Henry V, a leader of clear and decisive thought, had spent the night before the battle ensuring his army's quiet discipline. Orders had been given for absolute silence, a stark contrast to the boisterous French camp. Men-at-arms and knights were warned that any disobedience would cost them their horses and harness, while the lower ranks faced the chilling threat of losing their right ear. This quiet enforcement of order underscored Henry's strategic foresight, his understanding that in their vulnerable position, cohesion and stealth were paramount. With the first light of dawn, the English army began its methodical preparations. Henry positioned his men with a quiet precision, recognizing the unique advantages offered by the terrain. His men-at-arms, the core of his heavy infantry, were stationed in the center of his line, their armor perhaps dulled by the dampness, but their resolve firm. Flanking these central figures were the true center of gravity of Henry's force, the English longbowmen. These archers, numbering around 5,000, were deployed in wedges, their presence a quiet testament to the evolving nature of warfare. Before them, with quiet, disciplined movements, the archers began their crucial task, planting sharpened wooden stakes into the soft, muddy ground at an angle, forming a protective palisade wall. This innovative technique, a subtle yet profound departure from earlier battles like Crécy and Poitiers, was designed to create a formidable barrier against the anticipated French cavalry charge. The quiet thud of stakes being driven into the earth, the soft rustle of men moving through the damp field, would have been the only sounds, a methodical rhythm of preparation. These stakes, though simple, were a testament to English tactical ingenuity, transforming the open field into a deadly trap for any charging horseman. The longbows themselves, capable of an effective range of 250 yards, lay ready. They used staves gleaming faintly in the pale light, poised to unleash a relentless hail of arrows. Across the narrow, muddy field, the French army began to array itself. Their deployment, while numerically superior, adhered to a more traditional mass formation. They were divided into three main battles: a vanguard, a main battle, and a rearward battle, each packed with a flower of French chivalry, knights and men-at-arms, eager for glory. The sheer density of their formations, while intended to deliver a crushing blow, would prove to be a subtle disadvantage on the constricted battlefield. The ground, already churned by the movement of thousands of men and horses, would become even more treacherous, further impeding their heavily armored advance. The air was thick with a quiet tension, a profound stillness that belied the immense forces gathered. The English, disciplined and strategically positioned, waited with a quiet resolve, their longbows and sharpened stakes a silent promise of the fury to come. The French, confident in their numbers and the weight of their chivalry, prepared for a charge that they believed would sweep away the weary English. The stage was meticulously set, the conditions carefully laid, for a confrontation that would not only decide the fate of a campaign but also subtly alter the very understanding of medieval combat. The quiet anticipation hung heavy in the air, a prelude to the moment when the longbow's hum would begin to write a new chapter in history. As the first rays of the St. Crispin's Day sun began to gently illuminate the muddy field, a profound stillness settled over the English lines, a quiet, almost breathless anticipation. Across the narrow expanse, the French, confident in their overwhelming numbers and the formidable presence of their armored knights, began their advance. The ground, already softened by the previous day's rains, began to churn under the measured, heavy tread of thousands of men-at-arms and the powerful hooves of the mounted cavalry. The air, once still, now carried the subtle, growing rumble of their approach, a sound that spoke of immense, traditional power. The initial French charge, a wave of gleaming steel and thundering hooves, was aimed directly at the English center. The small mounted contingent, tasked with sweeping away the English archers from the flanks, surged forward with a quiet determination. However, their momentum was quickly broken by the unseen obstacle of the sharpened wooden stakes, firmly planted in the soft earth. Horses, caught unawares, stumbled and fell, creating a subtle disarray in the charging lines. The quiet thud of falling bodies, the muffled cries of men and beasts, began to mingle with the growing sounds of the advance, a subtle hint of the chaos to come. The protective palisade, a testament to English ingenuity, held firm, denying the French cavalry the clear path they so desperately sought. Then, with a quiet, almost imperceptible signal from King Henry V, the English longbowmen unleashed their fury. From the flanks of the English line, a relentless barrage of arrows ascended into the cool morning air. The sound was not a roar, but a continuous, gentle hum, like 1,000 bees taking flight, growing into a steady, whispering torrent. So dense was this aerial cascade that, according to some accounts, It momentarily seemed to darken the very sun, casting fleeting shadows over the field. Each arrow, launched with immense force from a longbow capable of an effective range of 250 yards, found its mark with chilling precision. They sought out the subtle vulnerabilities in plate armor, the gaps at the joints, the less protected areas of the horses. The impact on the French lines was immediate and devastating. The heavy rain of arrows created a profound sense of confusion and disarray. Horses, less armored than their riders, became agitated and unmanageable, the panicked movements further disrupting the tightly packed formations. Many knights, weighed down by their formidable armor, found their advance severely impeded by the deep, clinging mud. Each step became an arduous struggle, draining their strength with quiet, relentless effort. As more and more French soldiers pressed forward from behind, eager to join the fray, the vanguard became increasingly congested. The narrowness of the battlefield, a subtle advantage for the English, now acted as a cruel funnel, compressing the vast French numbers into an impossibly tight space. The French, packed shoulder to shoulder, found themselves in a desperate predicament. Their sheer density, intended to be their strength, became their greatest weakness. They had little room to maneuver, to swing their heavy weapons, or even to raise their arms effectively. The ground, churned into a thick, viscous mire by the thousands of advancing feet and falling bodies, made movement almost impossible. Men stumbled and fell, often sinking into the deep mud, their heavy armor becoming a suffocating burden. Those who fell were often pressed down by the relentless advance of their comrades, creating obstacles that further slowed and disoriented the lines behind them. The quiet sounds of struggle, the muffled grunts of exertion, and the soft clatter of armor against mud filled the air, a grim symphony of their mounting distress. As the French advance faltered, their discipline began to quietly unravel. The initial hailstorm of arrows, though lasting only a matter of minutes, had achieved its purpose, sowing chaos and exhaustion. Seeing their opportunity, the English archers, with a quiet, synchronized movement, traded their longbows for lighter, more agile weapons, poleaxes, lead mallets, and swords. Being less encumbered by heavy armor, they possessed a crucial advantage in mobility over the struggling French knights. They moved swiftly through the mud, often in small, coordinated groups, targeting individual knights who were trapped and disoriented. The close-quarters combat that ensued was a brutal, methodical affair, a quiet, relentless engagement where the English, with their superior agility and the French's inability to effectively counterattack, gained a decisive advantage. Despite the sheer weight of the French lines, which at times pushed the English back, Henry V's forces maintained their cohesion. A disciplined counterattack, fueled by their earlier successes and the disarray of their enemy, regained the English advantage. After approximately 2 to 3 hours of intense, quiet fighting, the French forces, their spirit broken and their ranks decimated, began a desperate, uncoordinated retreat. The field, once a vibrant tapestry of banners and gleaming armor, was now a scene of profound stillness, marked by the fallen and the struggling. In the immediate aftermath, a chilling rumor spread through the English ranks. The French were regrouping for a second assault. King Henry V, faced with the precarious situation of having many more prisoners than his own diminished fighting force, made a grim decision. Fearing a potential uprising among the captured if the battle were to resume, he issued a quiet, yet terrible, command: the execution of the majority of the French prisoners, sparing only a few high-ranking nobles who might yield valuable ransoms. This act, while not particularly controversial by the standards of the time, even some French chroniclers did not explicitly condemn it, resulted in the tragic loss of up to 2,200 French lives. Some accounts speak of groups of prisoners being confined and their lives extinguished in a quiet, contained manner. This grim necessity, born of the brutal realities of medieval warfare, underscored the profound cost of the English victory. The sheer scale of the French losses was staggering. Between 6,000 and 10,000 French troops lay fallen, including a significant portion of their nobility, the very flower of French chivalry. In stark contrast, the English had lost only a few hundred men, perhaps around 400. It was an overwhelming victory, a quiet testament to the longbow's devastating power and the English army's discipline and tactical foresight. Henry V, having secured this bloody triumph, returned to England a hero, his prestige greatly enhanced. The fields of Agincourt, once a scene of quiet anticipation, now lay silent, forever marked by the decisive clash that had subtly, yet irrevocably, reshaped the course of medieval warfare. As the quiet, muddy fields of Agincourt settled once more into a profound stillness, the echoes of the battle began to ripple outwards, shaping the course of the 100 Years' War and subtly altering the very understanding of warfare itself. The immediate aftermath was a stark tableau of contrasting fortunes. For the French, the losses were immense, a devastating blow to their military strength and, perhaps more significantly, to the very heart of their aristocratic society. Between 6,000 and 10,000 French troops lay fallen, a tragic number that included a significant portion of their nobility, the very flower of French chivalry, whose gleaming armor now lay dulled by the earth. In stark contrast, the English had suffered only a few hundred casualties, perhaps around 400 men, a remarkably low toll for such a decisive engagement. This disparity in losses was a quiet, undeniable testament to the effectiveness of the English longbow and the disciplined tactics employed by King Henry V. For Henry V, the victory at Agincourt was a moment of profound triumph. He returned to England a celebrated hero, his prestige greatly enhanced, his claim to the French throne seemingly validated by divine favor. The victory resonated deeply within England, providing a powerful surge of national morale after half a century marked by military setbacks. It was a success that echoed earlier, equally decisive English victories at Crécy and Poitiers, further cementing the reputation of the English longbow and the tactical prowess of their armies. The quiet celebrations in England, though perhaps muted by the solemnity of the losses, would have been filled with a renewed sense of purpose and pride. The strategic consequences of Agincourt were far-reaching, paving the way for further English conquests and successes in France. The French nobility, already weakened by internal divisions, found themselves even more fractured and unable to mount effective resistance against subsequent English advances. This disarray allowed Henry V to systematically subjugate Normandy by 1419, a significant territorial gain that further solidified English control in France. The culmination of these successes came with the Treaty of Troyes in 1420, a pivotal agreement that recognized Henry V as the regent of France and, crucially, as the heir apparent to the French throne, effectively disinheriting the French Dauphin, Charles. This treaty was further cemented by Henry's marriage to Catherine of Valois, the daughter of the French King Charles VI, weaving a subtle, yet powerful, dynastic thread between the two kingdoms. For a brief period, Henry's infant son, Henry VI, would even be nominally recognized as King of France, a quiet testament to the profound, albeit temporary, shift in power brought about by Agincourt. Beyond its immediate political and territorial impacts, Agincourt left an indelible mark on the broader history of warfare, contributing significantly to what historians often refer to as the military revolution of the late Middle Ages. The battle served as a powerful, symbolic end to the undisputed dominance of the armored knight on the battlefield. While plate armor continued to evolve, the sheer, relentless power of the longbow demonstrated that even the most formidable individual warrior could be overwhelmed by a disciplined, massed force of common soldiers wielding an effective ranged weapon. The quiet hum of thousands of arrows had proven more decisive than the thunder of 1,000 hooves. The French, in their attempts to comprehend the scale of their defeat, often preferred to interpret it as a divine punishment for their sins, rather than acknowledging the tactical superiority of the English. This perspective, while perhaps offering a measure of spiritual comfort, subtly allowed them to avoid a full confrontation with the changing realities of warfare and the need for significant tactical reform. Yet, the lessons of Agincourt, along with earlier battles like Crécy and Poitiers, slowly began to seep into military thought across Europe. The emphasis shifted from purely feudal levies, where lords brought their personal retinues, towards more professional, disciplined armies, where specialized roles, like that of the longbowman, became increasingly vital. This quiet evolution in military organization and technology would eventually lead to the widespread adoption of gunpowder weapons, further diminishing the role of the traditional knight and ushering in a new era of warfare. Agincourt, therefore, stands as more than just a single, bloody triumph. It is a quiet monument to tactical ingenuity, disciplined execution, and the profound impact of technological innovation. It reshaped the balance of power in the 100 Years' War, altered the course of dynastic succession, and, most importantly, contributed to a subtle, yet undeniable, shift in the very nature of medieval combat. The fields of Agincourt, once a scene of quiet anticipation and then brutal conflict, now lie silent, forever echoing with the story of how English longbows, wielded by common hands, quietly reshaped the grand tapestry of medieval warfare. The gentle whispers of history will forever carry its name, a subtle reminder of how even the smallest shifts can lead to the grandest changes.